Hello, everyone. So, today our topic of discussion is the prejudice and discrimination. So, essentially, prejudice is nothing but usually the negative attitude towards a group. And this prejudiced attitude is actually stemming from the stereotype thinking. So let us understand firstly that what is the stereotype thinking. So stereotype mainly is comprising of the cognitive component, which is actually the thought component, and essentially it is nothing but a cluster of ideas, you know, regarding the characteristics of a specific group. So, if a person is having a stereotype thinking, he's already made an assumption, pertaining to the characteristics that he would like to assign a particular group. He's very clear about those specific characteristics, and according to the person's assumption, who probably could have a stereotype thinking, he or she feels that all members, who are belonging to that particular group are actually possessing these characteristics, because stereotype is actually a cluster of ideas, and so basically these stereotypes, they consist of undesirable characteristics about that target group which probably they are talking about or they have taken into consideration, right? And now this stereotype, typical stereotype thinking is going to lead, to negative attitudes, towards that group. And these negative attitudes are nothing but prejudices, isn't it? So, stereotype is basically an overgeneralized and a very unverified prototype about a particular group. And it is because of stereotype thinking that ultimately a prejudiced attitude, or so to say, a negative attitude, is formed. So now moving on, of course, we have the next topic, which is the prejudice and the discrimination. Very, very interesting. So prejudice, if we come to see, is actually comprising mainly of the cognitive component and of course the affective component. Yes, the cognitive component is there, which is having all the ideas and all the beliefs, or probably all the characteristics that the concerned person has thought about of the target group. And along with this cognitive component, which is nothing but our own thought process, comes the affective component, which is the emotional component, comprising of all our feelings and emotions. So this generally gets clubbed, the component, which is the cognitive component, which is mainly our thought process. It's going to get clubbed with the affective component, which is the emotional component. So the thought process, the belief system is going to get clubbed with all the hatred, the dislike, which pertains to the emotional or the affective component. So this is what is happening when you tend to have a very negative attitude, or when you tend to form prejudice against a particular group. And this prejudiced attitude is stemming from nothing but the stereotype thinking, which is all pertaining to your cognitive component, your thought process about a particular group, you know. Then sometimes it also happens that, this prejudiced attitude can actually get translated into something called as discrimination, which is highlighting the behavioral component. Your actions, your behaviors, they all come under discrimination. Your thought process, your emotional component, that is all coming under your prejudice. Mainly, of course, these two components are coming under the prejudice. And how you behave, how you act it out, that's all sometimes getting translated into so called the discrimination. How prejudice is taking a turn and getting translated into discrimination. So now, of course, because people have started possessing this discrimination, people are going to obviously behave in a very, probably a less positive way towards a particular target group. And if we compare it to other groups, maybe they are not probably doing good to this particular target group, and they are not behaving in the right way as probably they should. because of that prejudiced or the negative attitude that they formed, you know. And of course, there are so many instances of discrimination if we come to see. If we talk about the genocide, that was actually committed by the Nazis in Germany, and that was against the Jewish people, you know. And genocide was actually, how people were deliberately killed, mass killing. And from a particular nation, they were killed and with the aim of destroying that particular nation, so there was so much of discrimination, and obviously there was this act of killing, but it was also accompanied with a lot of hatred, a lot of disliking, a lot of belief or thoughts that they had gathered, and that was all coming from the prejudiced or the negative attitude that is actually the prejudices, you know so, of course, it also happens that many a times, the prejudice can exist without showing discrimination, and likewise, discrimination can also be shown without prejudice, because essentially, if we see, the prejudice is mainly focusing on the cognitive and, of course, the affective component, which is your thought process, and of course your emotions, your feelings, towards a particular group, and usually they are negative attitudes. So a prejudiced person may not act on their attitude, essentially, therefore someone can be prejudiced towards a certain group but not discriminate against them, because discrimination is more so in terms of acting out, in terms of behavior, towards a particular group. So but also whenever you will see prejudice and discrimination coming together, literally, we tend to see that there'll be conflicts, between groups within the same society. And even in our own societies, we've seen so much such bad states of like literally discrimination, and sometimes it is accompanied with prejudice, sometimes it's accompanied without prejudice, and there can be instances of gender, religion, community, even various kinds of illnesses, when people tend to just behave in a very very negative way. They tend to isolate you, they don't really maybe involve you in social groups, and so much we've seen pertaining to discrimination. But essentially, it's not that it's associated with prejudice, or it's the prejudice that's turned into discrimination. Sometimes the two can actually exist very independently also, pertaining to these two very important terms, prejudice and discrimination. So, of course, in many cases, we've also seen that the behavior aspects, pertaining to the discriminatory actions, they can still be curbed by laws, by norms. But, your own feelings, your own emotions, pertaining to so much of dislike, hatred, and also your thought system, your thought process, your belief systems, they actually cannot be altered, literally, and that's very, very difficult to change. That's really very difficult to change. So, this was all about prejudice, discrimination, and the stereotype. So, thank you so much.